If someone told me 6 months ago that I'd be writing checks to charity and planning a European cruise with my granddaughter, I would have laughed. Because 6 months ago, I was listening to my son Brian call me a financial burden. I'm Helen Johnson, 69, widowed 7 years since my Frank passed. Frank was a union steelworker, worked his whole life at the plant. We lived modestly, saved every penny. Last Thanksgiving, I was helping Brian's wife Tiffany with dishes when I heard them talking in the living room. Honestly, Brian, your mom's just dead weight. When's she gonna stop being our problem? That assisted living place costs less than what we spend helping her every month. Helping me? I paid for my own everything. They drove me to doctor appointments and acted like it was such a burden. I know, babe, Brian replied. But what can I do? Between you and me, I don't think she's got much left anyway. Dad was just a factory worker. Something cold settled in my chest. Not just hurt, something that reminded me of who I used to be before I spent 40 years being Frank's wife. I finished those dishes real quiet, said my goodbyes, and drove home to my house on Maple Street, the house these kids thought was worthless. That night, I made a phone call that would change everything. Robert, it's Helen Johnson. I need to see you Monday morning. It's time to make changes to my will. Robert Martinez had been Frank's union lawyer for 30 years. He knew things about our finances I'd never shared with Brian. Things my son was about to learn the hard way, because Frank wasn't just a factory worker. He was a smart factory worker, and his worthless widow was about to show her family exactly what dead weight looked like. This was just the beginning of their education. After that call to Robert, I couldn't sleep. Something didn't feel right. In my 69 years, I've learned to trust my instincts, so I decided to investigate. The next morning, I drove by Brian and Tiffany's house in Willowbrook Estates. Brian always said they were struggling financially, that helping me was stretching their budget. But parked in their driveway was a brand new BMW SUV. Not the Honda Civic Tiffany used to drive, a gleaming white BMW with temporary tags. I sat there in my 2015 Toyota Camry, bought with cash because Frank taught me never to finance what I couldn't afford, and felt my blood pressure rising. That afternoon, I got on the computer Emily had helped me set up. Took me 3 hours, but I figured out Facebook. What I found made me sick. Picture after picture of Brian and Tiffany's struggling lifestyle. Dinner at Morton's Steakhouse, $50 entrees, weekend trips to Napa Valley. Tiffany's new Louis Vuitton purse that cost more than my monthly groceries. The captions were interesting. Living our best life. Blessed, no regrets. Sometimes you have to cut out toxic people. New chapter. Toxic people? This from the boy I worked double shifts to put through college, who lived in my basement rent-free until 26. Then I found the post that broke my heart. 3 weeks ago, my birthday. The birthday they forgot. Brian raising champagne at some fancy restaurant, celebrating freedom from financial obligations. Sometimes you have to choose happiness over guilt trips. Self-care. My birthday. They were celebrating not calling me. I closed that computer and walked to my bedroom closet. Behind Frank's old shirts, I pulled out the fireproof box with our important papers. Papers Brian had never seen. Frank's life insurance policy, $200,000. Oak Street rental property deed, $150,000 value. Bank savings, $75,000. Investment portfolio, $180,000. Total net worth, just over $600,000. All in my name. All of it Brian assumed didn't exist. Frank and I used to joke about our ace in the hole. Let them think we're poor, Frank said. Rich folks get taken advantage of. Poor folks get left alone. We'd been left alone all right. So alone my own son felt comfortable talking about me like I was already dead. I realized something that night. They didn't just take me for granted. They took me for a fool. Tomorrow, I was going to start showing them exactly how foolish that assumption was. 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, I turned 69. Birthdays had always been important in our family. Frank never missed one in 43 years. This year was different. By noon, no call. By 5, I was worried something had happened. I called Brian's cell. Voicemail. Hi, honey. It's Mom. Just wanted to make sure you're okay. Call me back. No return call that evening. None the next day. Thursday, I swallowed my pride and called again. Oh, Mom! Brian's voice was cheerful. Hey, how are you? I'm fine. I was wondering. Haven't heard from you since last weekend. Silence. Then, oh no, Mom, I am so sorry. We've been crazy busy with work, and Tiffany's planning her sister's baby shower. Honestly, it just slipped my mind. My birthday. Slipped his mind. It's okay, I said, because that's what you're supposed to say when your heart is breaking. Let me make it up to you. Dinner this weekend? But that weekend came and went. Brian called Saturday. Work emergency. Next weekend, Tiffany was feeling under the weather. The weekend after, they had prior commitments. 3 weeks of excuses while I sat wondering where I'd gone wrong as a mother. Then came Thanksgiving and that kitchen conversation, and it all made sense. But what really broke my heart was what I found on Facebook later. November 15th, my birthday. Brian and Tiffany at some upscale steakhouse, dressed to the nines, celebrating what Brian called new beginnings and fresh starts. They didn't forget my birthday. They chose to celebrate something else instead. I stared at that picture for a long time. Brian looked so happy, so carefree. When was the last time I'd seen him smile like that with me? When was the last time he'd looked at me like I was something to celebrate instead of endure? That's when I realized something that changed everything. For 41 years, I'd been Brian's mother. I'd sacrificed, saved, supported, put his needs ahead of my own. I'd defined myself by my relationship to him, but somewhere along the way, he'd stopped being my son. The son I'd raised would never have forgotten his mother's birthday, would never have let his wife talk about her like garbage, would never have looked at his mother as a burden. I spent 69 years putting family first. Time to put myself first. Time to remind my son that respect isn't inherited, it's earned. And if he wanted to act like he didn't have a mother, maybe it was time to make that a reality. Robert Martinez met me Monday morning in the same office where he'd helped Frank and me plan our future 30 years earlier. "Helen," he said, "you sounded upset. What's going on?" I told him everything. The Thanksgiving conversation, Facebook posts, forgotten birthday, all of it. "I want to change my will," I said, "and revoke Brian's power of attorney. Before we make permanent changes, maybe we should talk to Brian. Sometimes people don't realize how their actions affect others." So I called Brian that afternoon. "We need to talk about family business. Come over Wednesday evening." He arrived with Tiffany, both looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Mom, before you say anything, I want to apologize again about your birthday. We feel terrible." "Do you?" I asked quietly. "Of course," Tiffany jumped in. "It's just been crazy. Brian got promoted, which is amazing, but longer hours. And my sister's pregnancy complications, so I've been helping with doctor appointments. We're stretched thin." I looked at these strangers in my living room, the room where I'd rocked Brian to sleep, where Frank taught him chess, where we'd celebrated every Christmas. "Speaking of being stretched thin," Brian said, "that's what we wanted to discuss. Here it comes. We're worried about you. Living alone, not driving at night, getting older. I'm 69, not 99. I know, but we think it's time to consider your options." Tiffany pulled out a brochure. We found this beautiful assisted living community. Sunset Manor. Really nice activities, meal plans, people your age. I looked at the brochure. Smiling elderly people playing bingo, a dining room like a hospital cafeteria, a spacious apartment smaller than my bedroom. "How much?" Brian and Tiffany exchanged glances. $4,000 a month. "But if you sell this house, you should get enough for the first few years, and then what? By then, maybe your needs will have changed," Tiffany said carefully. "Changed. Maybe I'd be dead." "We can't afford to keep helping you financially," Brian said bluntly. "We've got our own future to think about. Kids we want someday. Our retirement. Kids they wanted. Their retirement. Their future." "What if I said no?" Brian looked surprised. "This isn't really a choice. You can't stay here forever. What happens when you fall? When you can't drive? We can't be responsible for taking care of you." Responsible for taking care of me. The woman who'd taken care of him for 28 years. "And if I don't agree? Then we'll explore other options," Tiffany said, "for everyone's safety." I looked at these two people telling me I had to leave my home, spending money I didn't know they had while claiming they couldn't help their mother. "I need time to think." "Of course," Brian said, standing. But Mom, this is happening, one way or another. After they left, I sat looking at that brochure. $4,000 a month. More than Frank made his first 5 years at the plant. They had no idea what they just started. 2 weeks later, my granddaughter Emily called with wonderful news. Grandma Helen, I'm graduating from State Saturday. Bachelor's in nursing, just like you always said. Emily was 22, Brian's daughter from his first marriage. Her mother died when Emily was 12, and I'd helped raise her. She was the bright spot in this mess. Smart, kind, nothing like her stepmother. I'm so proud, sweetheart. I wouldn't miss it. Dad's being weird, though. Keeps asking if you're really coming, like he doesn't want you there. That should have been my warning. Saturday morning, I put on my best dress, navy blue Frank bought for our 40th anniversary, and drove to the university. I found Brian and Tiffany in the parking lot. Tiffany wore a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly groceries. Brian a new suit I'd never seen. Oh, good, you made it, Brian said, not sounding happy. Tiffany looked me up and down like she smelled something unpleasant. Helen, is that the dress you're wearing? It's my best dress. Frank bought it. It's very vintage, she said, making vintage sound like an insult. At the auditorium entrance, Tiffany suddenly stopped. Helen, I think you should sit separately from us. I blinked. I'm sorry? We're in the special reserve section for immediate family. And honestly, she glanced around, then lowered her voice. You look a little out of place. Poor, you know? We don't want Emily embarrassed by having her friends see us with… Well, she didn't finish. She didn't need to. Brian stood behind her, saying nothing. My son, who I'd raised to stand up for what's right, said absolutely nothing. The back section is fine for people like you, Tiffany continued. Emily will understand. She knows you can't afford nicer things. People like me. I felt something crack inside my chest, like ice on a lake when weather starts to warm. Of course, I said quietly. I understand. I found a seat in the back, watching from a distance as Brian and Tiffany posed for pictures with Emily, playing the part of successful, loving family. When Emily walked across that stage, I cried with pride. She'd worked so hard, overcome so much. After the ceremony, Emily found me. Grandma, did you see? I did it. I saw, sweetheart. I'm so proud. I hugged her tight, memorizing the moment. Why were you way back there? I saved you a seat up front. Before I could answer, Tiffany appeared. Emily, darling, come on. We have reservations at the country club. The photographer's waiting. Great. Grandma, you're coming to lunch, right? Tiffany's smile never wavered, but her eyes went cold. Oh, I'm sorry, sweetie, but the reservation's just for immediate family. You understand how these places are about numbers. Emily frowned. But Grandma is immediate family. Well, yes, technically, but the reservation was expensive, and we know your grandmother prefers more casual dining experiences. Code for she's too poor. Emily looked between us, confusion and hurt written all over her face. It's okay, Emily, I said quickly. You celebrate with your father and Tiffany. We'll have our own celebration later. But Grandma, go on, sweetheart. This is your day. I watched them walk away. Brian in his expensive suit, Tiffany in designer dress, Emily looking back with disappointment. Not in me, but for me. Standing in that parking lot, wearing my vintage dress, watching my family drive to a country club I wasn't good enough for, I felt something I hadn't felt in 7 years. Frank's presence, his voice in my ear. Helen Marie, you've taken enough. Time to remind them who they're dealing with. That's when I remembered who I really was. Not just Brian's mother or Frank's widow. I was Helen Johnson. And Helen Johnson didn't take this treatment from anyone, not even family. Monday after Emily's graduation, Brian called with good news. Mom, remember that assisted living place? Tiffany found something even better. There's an opening, but we need to move fast. How fast? They need a decision by Wednesday. I've set up a meeting with a lawyer friend tomorrow afternoon. He'll explain everything. A lawyer friend. Not Robert Martinez, our family lawyer for 30 years, a friend. What kind of paperwork? Just the usual. Transfer of assets to cover costs, power of attorney arrangements, standard procedure. Standard procedure. Transfer of assets. This seems fast. Mom, We've been over this. You can't stay in that house forever. This is what's best for everyone. Everyone. Meaning them. Tuesday afternoon, Brian and Tiffany drove me to a small office in a strip mall. The lawyer was young David Kim, looked barely old enough for law school. Mrs. Johnson, pleasure to meet you. Brian's told me about your situation. My situation. David spread out papers. This is straightforward. We're transferring ownership of your house and assets into a trust Brian will manage. This ensures clear funding for your care. I pretended to study the papers, but I was studying David Kim. Expensive suit, expensive watch, nervous energy. What happens to my house after I'm gone? Any remaining trust assets would naturally pass to your beneficiaries, in this case, Brian. Naturally. What if I change my mind about assisted living? David and Brian exchanged glances. Once the trust is established and you've moved into care, it's not practical to reverse these arrangements, David said. These decisions are made with your long-term welfare in mind. My welfare, not my choice. I see. And your fee? Brian's taking care of that. No cost to you. Of course, Brian was paying this lawyer to steal my house. This looks thorough, I said, picking up the pen. I do have one question. Of course. Have you ever heard of Robert Martinez? David's face went blank. Robert Martinez. He's been my family's lawyer for 30 years, handled my husband's estate, my will. I'm curious why Brian didn't mention this meeting to him. The nervous energy got more nervous. We thought it would be easier to use someone new, Brian said quickly. Fresh perspective. And Robert doesn't know about this? There's no need to involve other attorneys, David said. This is simple. Simple. Right. I set down the pen. I think I'd like Robert to look at these papers first, just to make sure I understand correctly. Mom, Brian said, frustration creeping in. The deadline is tomorrow. If we don't get these signed today, you'll lose this opportunity. What opportunity? The opportunity to sign my house over to you? Dead silence. That's not what this is, Tiffany said weakly. Isn't it? I looked at Brian. If I sign these papers, what happens to my house when I die? Silence. I thought so. I stood up. I think I need to discuss this with my own lawyer. Mrs. Johnson, David said urgently, I really think you're misunderstanding. Am I? Tell me, David, does your mother know what you do for a living? I walked toward the door, Brian and Tiffany scrambling behind me. Mom, wait. You're making a mistake. This is for your own good. I turned and looked at my son. Really looked at him. When had he become someone I didn't recognize? You're right, Brian. I have been making a mistake. I've been thinking my family loved me. We do love you. No. You love my house. You love what you think I'm worth. You love the idea of getting rid of me. I walked out and called a cab. That night, I called Robert Martinez. Robert, it's Helen. I need to see you tomorrow morning, and bring the paperwork we discussed. It's time. They wanted a vulnerable old lady they could manipulate. They were about to learn they'd been dealing with the wrong woman entirely. Wednesday morning, I was in Robert Martinez's office by 9 sharp. I'd brought everything. David Kim's trust documents, Facebook printouts, bank statements, property deeds. Helen, Robert said after hearing the whole story, are you certain this is the path you want? Robert, yesterday my son tried to trick me into signing away my house to a lawyer I'd never met. He spent months calling me a financial burden while spending more on dinner than I spend on groceries in a week. At my granddaughter's graduation, his wife said I looked too poor to sit with family. Robert's jaw tightened. She said that? People like me should sit in the back. People like you. Helen, you're one of the most financially secure widows I represent. You and Frank built something substantial. They don't know that. And Brian's been your power of attorney for 3 years. I've always wondered why you never mentioned your assets. Frank and I decided to keep finances private. He said rich people get taken advantage of. Poor people get left alone. We liked being left alone. Well, you haven't been left alone. You've been targeted. Robert pulled out a legal pad. Let's talk about what you want to do. Power of attorney revocation is easy. Will changes are straightforward. But Helen, once we do this, there's no going back. Robert, my relationship with my son was damaged the moment he decided I was worth more dead than alive. For the next hour, we went through everything. Robert explained how David's documents would have made me a ward of my own son, with no control over finances or living arrangements. "This is predatory elder abuse," Robert said. "If you'd signed this, Brian could have forced you into any facility, sold your house, used your money however he wanted. No legal recourse. Can we do something about David Kim? I'll be reporting this to the state bar. This needs to be stopped." Then the fun part, my new will. "I want to leave everything to Emily. House, accounts, investments, rental property, everything." "Everything?" "With one condition. She can't access it until 25. Until then, you manage as trustee." "And Brian?" $1, so he can't claim I forgot him." Robert actually smiled. "And you want to tell him about this?" "Oh, yes. I want him to know exactly what his financially struggling mother is worth and exactly what his behavior cost him." "Helen, why didn't you ever tell Brian about your assets? This might have been avoided." "Maybe. Or maybe knowing I had money would have made him treat me differently for wrong reasons. Frank and I wanted to be loved for who we were, not what we had. And now? Now I know the difference. Emily loves me whether I have $10 or 10 million. Brian loves what he thinks he can get from me." Robert finished his notes. "You know what's ironic? If Brian had been a decent son, he would have inherited substantial fortune. Instead, his greed cost him everything. That's not ironic, Robert. That's justice. When do you want to tell him?" "Tomorrow. I want him to know exactly who he's been dealing with. Time to show them what a poor factory worker's widow could really do." Thursday afternoon, I called Brian. "I've made my decision about assisted living. Can you and Tiffany meet me at your house this evening?" "Of course, Mom. I knew you'd come around. This is really for the best." "Yes, it really is." I arrived at 6 sharp, carrying a manila folder and wearing the same navy dress from Emily's graduation, the one Tiffany called poor. Brian answered with a big smile. "Mom, come in. Tiffany's making coffee." Their living room was all white furniture and abstract art. Tiffany emerged with delicate china that probably cost more than most people's car payments. "Helen, we're so glad you've decided to be practical." "Oh, I'm being very practical," I said, setting my folder on their glass coffee table. "So when can we schedule the move?" Brian asked. "That's what I want to discuss." I opened my folder and pulled out the first document. "This is revocation of power of attorney. As of this morning, you no longer have legal authority over my affairs." Brian's smile faltered. "What? Why would you do that?" "Because yesterday you tried to trick me into signing away my house." "We weren't tricking you. We were helping you plan." "I see." I pulled out the second document. "This is my new will. I thought you might be interested." Brian reached for the papers, hands shaking. I watched his face as he read, watched the color drain as he got to the important parts. "This says Emily inherits everything." "That's right. But what about me?" "Keep reading." His face went white. $1? I wanted to make sure no one could say I forgot you. Tiffany grabbed the papers. "This can't be legal. You can't cut your own son out." "Actually, I can. Robert Martinez assures me it's completely legal." "When did you talk to Robert?" "Yesterday, after you tried to steal my house." "We weren't stealing anything." I pulled out the third set of documents, bank statements, investment portfolios, property deeds. "Brian, do you know what these are?" He stared like they might bite him. "These are my financial records. Your father and I were more successful than you knew." I pointed to the bank statement. "That's just the savings account." Tiffany's coffee cup clattered. $75,000? Just one account? I showed the investment portfolio. "This is what your father built over 30 years of just being a factory worker." Brian's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "The rental property. We've owned that 15 years. Life insurance, $200,000. Total net worth, just over $600,000. The silence was deafening. "So when you called me a financial burden, when you said there wouldn't be anything worth inheriting, when you told people I was poor," I leaned forward. "You were talking about a woman worth more than $500,000. "But why didn't you tell us?" Brian whispered. "Because I wanted to be loved for who I was, not what I had. Unfortunately, I discovered you don't love me at all." "This is insane," Tiffany said. "You can't give everything to Emily." "Are you?" "Because the son I raised would never have tried to steal his mother's house." I stood up, gathering my papers. "You wanted to know when I'd stop being your problem, Brian? Congratulations. As of today, I'm not your problem anymore, and you're not my heir anymore. I left them sitting in their expensive living room, finally understanding exactly what their greed had cost them. Everything. Within a week, the whole story came out. Robert's complaint against David Kim made local news. Turns out David had been running similar scams on other elderly clients. The Tribune headline read, "Local couple accused of elder financial abuse against mother." The phone calls started immediately. "Helen, I had no idea what you were going through," said neighbor Martha. Then church members, ladies from senior center, people who'd known me for decades. "We thought you were struggling financially," said Betty from Quilting Circle. "Brian told everyone you were having hard times. He even set up a fundraising page for your medical expenses." A fundraising page. For medical expenses I didn't have. Money going directly into their pockets. The more I learned, the sicker I felt. They'd been using my supposed poverty to gain sympathy and financial help while spending on luxury items. But the most important call came from Emily. "Grandma, I just found out what Dad tried to do. I am so sorry. I had no idea." "It's not your fault, sweetheart. I should have known something was wrong at graduation. The way Tiffany talked to you, the way Dad just stood there. I feel terrible. You don't need to apologize for your father's behavior. Can I come see you this weekend? I want to hear the whole story." Saturday afternoon, Emily sat in my kitchen while I told her everything. Her face got angrier with each detail. "They're monsters," she said finally. "They're just people who lost their way. How can you be so calm?" I smiled. "Because I won. Your father thought he was dealing with a helpless old woman. Instead, he was dealing with someone who'd been planning for the future longer than he's been alive. The money thing is crazy. I had no idea you and Grandpa Frank were so well off. We lived modestly because we wanted to. That's different from being poor." Emily shook her head. "Dad's going to lose his mind when he realizes what he's given up. He already has. Tiffany filed for divorce yesterday." Emily's eyes widened. "What?" "She married your father thinking he'd inherit substantial fortune. When she found out that fortune was going to you instead, she left him? Moved out Tuesday. Took the BMW and most of the furniture. For the first time since this began, I actually felt sorry for Brian. He'd lost his mother, his inheritance, and his wife, all in 1 week. But that's what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness and greed for love. Sometimes consequences teach better than words ever could." 6 months later, I'm sitting in the sunroom of my beautiful new townhouse in Maple Grove Senior Community, the one I chose for myself. Emily's across from me, going over nursing school loan paperwork before I write the check to pay off her debt. "Grandma, you really don't have to do this," she says. "Emily, I'm 70 with more money than I can spend in 2 lifetimes. What am I saving it for?" We look out the window as a familiar car pulls into visitor parking. Brian gets out slowly, looking like he's aged 5 years in 6 months. "You invited him?" Emily asks. "I did. It's time." Emily opens the door when Brian knocks. He looks around my new place with obvious surprise. Hardwood floors, modern kitchen, expensive furniture I finally felt free to buy. "Mom, thank you for agreeing to see me." "Sit down, Brian." He takes a seat, looking smaller somehow, defeated. "I came to apologize. For everything. The things I said, what I tried to do. There's no excuse." "No, there isn't." He flinches but nods. "Tiffany's gone. Moved to California with some guy she met online. Turns out she'd been planning to leave for months, waiting for—" He trails off. "Waiting for my money to come through?" "Yeah, I lost my job too. The elder abuse investigation. Even though charges weren't filed, my company didn't want negative publicity. And the house? I can't afford payments without Tiffany's income. I'll probably have to sell." I study my son's face. He looks genuinely remorseful, genuinely broken. But is he sorry for what he did? Or just sorry he got caught? "Why did you do it, Brian?" He's quiet for a long time. "I guess I started seeing you as a burden instead of a person. You were this problem I had to solve, this responsibility I didn't want. And Tiffany kept saying you were holding us back, taking care of me. Brian, in 7 years since your father died, what exactly have you done to take care of me?" He can't answer, because the answer is nothing. "You drove me to a few appointments and acted like you were doing me the greatest favor," I continue. "Meanwhile, I paid for my own everything. The only burden was the one I put on myself, pretending you were the son I raised. Tears start running down his face. I know I messed up. But Mom, you're all the family I have left. That's not true. You have Emily. Emily won't even talk to me. I look at my granddaughter, who shakes her head firmly. Brian, the changes I made aren't punishment. They're protection. Protection for Emily and protection for myself. I understand. Do you? Because I'm not convinced you understand what you really lost. He looks confused. You didn't just lose an inheritance. You lost a mother who would have done anything for you. You lost someone who worked 2 jobs to put you through college, who helped you buy your first house, who babysat Emily every weekend for 3 years. I stand and walk to the window. You lost someone who loved you unconditionally for 41 years, and you traded all of that for what? A house you thought was worthless? Money you didn't even know existed? I know, he whispers. No, you don't. Because if you knew, if you really understood what you had, you never would have thrown it away. I turn back to face him. I spent 69 years thinking family meant unconditional love. You taught me that family can also mean betrayal and greed. That's painful to learn at my age, but also valuable. Brian wipes his eyes. Is there any chance you might change your mind? About the will? And there it is. Even now he's still thinking about the money. Brian, the fact that you're still asking that question tells me you haven't learned anything. I walk him to the door. You're welcome to visit if you'd like to try rebuilding some kind of relationship. But if you do, it needs to be because you want a mother, not because you want an inheritance. After he leaves, Emily sits beside me on the couch. Do you think he'll change? I don't know, but I've learned you can't change people, only how you respond to them. How do you feel about everything now? I look around my beautiful home, think about the cruise we're planning, the charities I support, the friends I've made. Emily, I spent most of my life defining myself by relationships to other people. Frank's wife, Brian's mother, your grandmother. Those are important parts of who I am, but not all of who I am. What do you mean? I mean, I'm also Helen Johnson, a woman who survived the Depression, who worked her way through high school, who built a life and fortune with a man she loved. A woman who knows the difference between being alone and being lonely. I smile at my granddaughter. My scars taught me I don't need anyone's permission to live my life the way I choose, and I don't need anyone's approval to know my own worth. Your scars? The emotional scars from this experience. They hurt at first, but they also healed me. They showed me strengths I didn't know I had. Emily nods thoughtfully. So what happens now? Now I live my life. I travel. I spoil my granddaughter. I support causes I believe in. I make friends with people who choose to love me. I look out at the beautiful gardens surrounding our community. I learned something important, Emily. Some people see scars and think damaged. I see scars and think survivor. I love you, Grandma. I love you too, sweetheart. And that love, the real kind, without conditions, that's what makes all the rest worthwhile. As the sun sets outside my window, I realize something profound. My scars didn't weaken me. They revealed the strength that was always there. And now, at 70, I'm finally shining as bright as I was always meant to.